Hey, welcome back. Jason here at Shred Mentor Rock Guitar Academy, and welcome to Q&A session number 2. Today, Jacob asks, hey guys, any tips on how to put theory in practice? The idea here is always going to be to apply it within a context. A lot of times when, as guitarists, it's very common to sort of just kind of play your guitar and, by itself in a room. So as long as you play the scale correctly, you kind of can't mess up. But the thing is, it's not really fully applying it or putting to use just by playing the scale. So, melodically, I guess that sounds all okay because I stayed within E minor and used a little bit of E minor pentatonic and did some phrasing stuff. But there was nothing to say which notes were right at which time, and there was nothing to lock me into a rhythm either. So the real trick is to be able to put this to use in actual music. So the main answer would be do this in context, and that context comes from backing tracks. I do offer quite a few backing tracks for rock and metal on shredmentor.com, but really YouTube is an amazing resource. So just look up backing tracks. If you want a particular style, try throwing that in there and experiment with some different search terms on YouTube, and you can find a lot of really cool ones. Or, better yet, you can make your own, which is what I usually do. So the Shred Mentor ones are ones I've made specifically to play along to for a long time, like 10 minutes, so you don't keep getting interrupted. But basically just having a chord progression that goes over and over again is really helpful. So this is where if you have any way to record yourself at all, even in a really rough way, having the ability to record yourself playing a basic chord progression on the fly and then being able to solo along to it is going to be extremely valuable to your playing, because this is how you're going to be able to hear how the notes work within the chord, because you want to be targeting the notes of your chord. So really, like, the first thing I would say is get a chord progression going. It can be the most basic thing. In fact, I recommend in the beginning just practicing over simple 2-chord changes so that you can get used to that particular change, and starting with whatever key it is. So today I'm going to use a lot of E minor as the key. So like an E minor chord and then a C major chord, and just get used to what would be called a 1-6. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So E is your 1 chord. Okay, C is actually a flat 6 here, but it's a major chord there, so that you can get used to playing that 1-6 progression in minor. Once you get an idea of which notes from the scale work, you can kind of do that really in any key, because it doesn't. The notes are going to move, but the relationships to each other are going to stay the same. All right, so I've actually got a quick backing track that I put together here, and it follows those. In fact, it's a slightly extended version of it, because what I'm doing here is, like, I borrowed stuff from an E minor add 9. Okay, so that's basically just your 1, 3, and 5 at the core of that, E, G, and B. But I also added an F sharp in there too, which creates a nice bit of dissonance between the F and the G and the E. And I just basically use this. So, and then I just swapped out the B for a C, and then I used an A. So it's almost kind of like I'm throwing a third chord in there, almost like an A minor, but it's got a raised 6 in there, and it's got a 7, so it's like an A minor, 7, 13, add 13, something like that. I don't know. See, the thing is, I try not to get too caught up in what it's called, as long as I know what the ingredients are. Just 1 through 7. A minor would be A, C, and E in this, okay? But the E is over here, the F sharp is the 6, and G is the 7. So I have 1, 3, 5, 6, 7. Okay? As a chord. So I know which notes I want to be focusing on. Basically, it's kind of the root note, the lowest note in the overall formula is what I'm going to try to harmonize. So over the E, I'm going to focus on E, G, and B. And over the C, I'm going to focus on the C, E, and G. Notice E and G are in both of those chords. And over the A minor portion, I'm going to focus on the A, the C, and the E. So it seems like E is going to be the safest note. So when I see an E while I'm playing through my scale, any E, doesn't matter what octave, every possible way that I can kind of make my way back to the E with my melodies is going to make it so that I lock in with the chord progression a little bit better. All right, so for example, what that might work out as, if I just stick with the E minor or the E root, I would get so I could just keep coming back to that E, and if I can, as I get more and more used to this, I become able to play different other chord tones as well. So there's a lot to store in your mind, which is a good reason to start with simple chord changes, just a 2-chord progression, because for each chord, assuming you're just dealing with the triad, the 1-3-5 formula, you're already going to have 3 notes to try to store in your mind for each of those chords. So, but by doing that, I had to be able to stay in time as well, and that's another reason you want to use backing tracks, is that you can't just be free form and without rhythm. You kind of need to be playing off of the actual beats as well when you create your phrases, which is going to come down to how many notes you play in each phrase. So it really directly defines what you're ultimately going to do. And it's very easy to kind of get into this sort of noodling over a backing track kind of mode too, but really you want to be thinking in, think of target tones, and it's almost like connect the dots. Like if I know that E is the note in my E minor chord that I'm going to use, and C, or sorry, no, G will be the note I use. I'm going to use the G to target during my C major chord. Then when I start playing, you know, so I'm going to have to make my phrase kind of work. I'm going to have to work my way over to that G, so I have like an end spot in mind, but I'm free to still use all the notes in the scale as I do it. It's just a matter of trying to create more clear phrases, and really rhythm is kind of the main ingredient of creating a nice strong melody, because it's going to, you know, think of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Da, 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 da. It's a very clear rhythmic idea at the heart of that, and he modulates it throughout the key of C minor in that case. So I hope this helps a little bit, you know, and on a more simple level, to really get an idea of what each note does in the scale. I would recommend backing drones. I'm not really sure, aside from the ones that I've made myself, I really don't know where to find them. So there are some free ones on the shredmentor.com website in the free practice tools. You just have to create a student account so you can access it, but that is free. And of course, if you have a practice tools membership, it's on every practice tool just about, so that you can practice the visuals that you're seeing on the screen along to it. So like, I have an E drone. So if you really want to get an idea of what the E minor, E Dorian, E Phrygian dominant, E harmonic minor, E Hungarian minor, or any other kind of scale works within, you know, how it works within the actual harmony of the root note, then the drone is a fantastic tool for that, because it's better for training your ears more quickly, because you get to understand what all the notes do in relation to that note. And with the drones, with the backing track drones, there's 3 different sets of them, just so you can kind of pick your flavor. But basically, all 12 of the notes of the chromatic scale are there, so you can really choose whatever the backing chord root would have been. So let's say if you're practicing in E minor, you can actually practice the E minor scale in the context of all 7 of the notes in E minor, so that you can get a feeling for really what each mode really sounds like. Because a mode is a root center, really. It implies that each of the notes is sort of a root note for its time. And that's basically what happens when you're playing over chord progressions anyway, is you're playing over the notes, or you're playing in harmony to the notes of the scale. So it's how the scale sounds in relation to each one of its notes. And that's the best way to describe how drones can help you. So just having, you know, E in the background gives me an idea of what each of the notes does and how it harmonizes. And again, the chord tones are going to be the main ones, the root, 3rd, and 5th of the scale I'm playing off of. So if I'm going for an E minor sound, I'm going to target an E, go up a minor 3rd, 1, 2, 3, 3 half steps, and then 4 half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4. I tend to do this just automatically now, but in my head, that's what I establish right away. As soon as I start playing, right away I find the root, I find the minor third if I'm going for a minor scale, and I go for the perfect fifth. I just identify a couple locations for those notes so that I have a little bit of an idea of how I'm going to structure my melody. But then, where are the other notes? That's how I'm going to make interesting melodies, because you don't want to just be locked into the chord. That's going to actually be boring. So you do want to add the other scale tones in there as well. That's how your notes, your melodies are going to become interesting. So, but by landing on those notes during that backing root note, that's how you're going to end up making it sound. You're going to give your melodies more of that I meant to do that kind of factor, which is very important if you want to, create good sounding music. Things should sound like they were kind of meant to happen, and that's really where the chords come in handy too. So use the backing drones. That's another way to do it in terms of ear training, and also just getting to understand what each note really does in the scale, because they all, when the chord changes, the notes that you were just focusing on for the previous chord very well probably won't work. They might share one or two chord tones, like in our example earlier, the note E was in the E minor chord, it was in the C major chord as the third, and it was in the A minor chord as the fifth. So the E note works, but it actually has a different role that it plays in even just the three chords that it's in. So if you get to a D chord and you start playing an E, now you're playing in like a ninth, or basically playing the second. So it's going to be a little bit more dissonant. So doesn't have to be bad. Dissonant isn't automatically bad, because that's just, the D suspended second chord I just played has an E in it as well. It's sort of a replacement for the F sharp, which normally would have been the third. Okay, so if you're not already doing it, it's going to be really, really helpful if you start to think of your scales as scale degree numbers and not just the names of the notes by letter. Because once you understand that, you're actually dealing with the formulas, and the way the 1 relates to the 3 is always going to be the same no matter what key you're in, as long as you're using the same type of scale. Whereas having to think about how a B flat works with a D flat makes you stop and have to think, wait, what am I dealing with here? And so when you just know that 1 and 3 work a certain way, it doesn't really matter what key you're in. 1 and 5 work a certain way together. So you're dealing with note relationships. And once again, backing tracks are a big part of that. So you need to be thinking about the numbers of the notes in your chords as well, so that you can stack the 1, 3, 5 from that note. So if my note is 4 that I'm playing over in the scale, that I'm playing over the 4 chord, then the 6 and the 8, which is the 1 again, 4, 6, and 1 are my main target tones, and I want to be focusing on those during that. So you need to know those scale degrees and be thinking of your scales as that while you're playing it. All right, so awesome question. I hope that this helped to address it, at least I guess from a more rock improvisation style. So awesome, thanks Jacob. And so our next question then. Sohail asks, F sharp / G flat is the augmented fourth or diminished fifth of the C major scale, which yes it is. And it is 6 semitones higher from C. I'm trying to make a triad of it, which is diminished seventh, I guess. Should I choose notes from the F sharp or G flat scale or the C major scale? Awesome question. That's basically, and by the way, very good that you calculated it down to how many semitones it is. I've personally really found that very helpful. What I would do, basically, if you're trying to create a triad out of an existing interval, okay, as you mentioned, it could be considered the sharp 4 or it could be the flat 5. Since we're trying to make a triad, remember a triad is 1, 3, and 5, essentially. So where the 3 is and where the 5 is can change, but in relation to the root note here, we already know that we have a tritone, which is a flat fifth. So since 1, 3, and 5 are what we're going for, we want to consider this a flat 5. So now what we need is a third. So it kind of depends which triad you're trying to make. If you are trying to make a C diminished triad, you already have the root and flat fifth, so now you need the flat 3, which would be the E flat in this case. Okay, if you're trying to make a chord, the shape is gonna probably change, but you would need to just identify. I actually like to find these patterns on a single string first, so that I can visualize the actual interval. Minor third, 1, 2, 3. minor third, 1, 2, 3. There we go. So if I'm starting from the C at the 8th fret, it's going to be the 11th fret, and then the 14th fret. And that just gives me a quick, a quick way that I can just sort of tap the melody and just kind of get a really quick sampling of what they sound like together. Okay, but then again, like I said, if you want to create a playable chord, there's that. There are, you could do it in another order once you know what your notes are, like root, flat fifth, octave, and then here I'm barring to the minor third. Okay, and really, since it's essentially the same formula, you could do the same thing from F sharp. But let's take a look at what notes we're actually trying to go for. This time, if we start from the F sharp and we're trying to make a triad from F sharp as the root note, and then we have C as our fifth, it's going to be right in between. It's going to be a minor third in between each note. So it's going to be A in this case. F sharp, 1, 2, 3, that gives us A, and then 1, 2, 3, that's C right there. Okay, so in either case you can play, that would be 2, 3, 4, and I'm barring over to 2 again. And I just don't play the first and second string. So that's how I would go about it. Now you also asked, which would be a diminished seventh, I guess. This would not be a seventh. A seventh is actually what would happen if you added another third, or diminished seventh would be another minor third on top of those 2 minor thirds. So if we're coming from C, E flat, G flat, 1, 2, 3, then we would include an A, which is really kind of a blending of both of those two together. But it is a different kind of chord. It's an extension of a diminished triad. So the triad is just 1, 3, 5. A 7 is 1, 3, 5, 7. Okay, so just to clarify, that would be a different kind of chord, but actually it's a really good sounding one. So typically when it comes to the one chord in every key that's diminished, I actually tend to just substitute a diminished seventh anyway, because it's a lot easier to come up with cool ways to play it, because basically it's a symmetrical pattern, and frankly you don't really have to keep track of as much. You just need to make your way back to whatever the chord tone of the next chord is when it resolves. So you can play your diminished seventh patterns however you like for a while, and it works nicely. But you just have to be careful that you're not playing if that the normal seventh of the minor scale happens to be where it normally would be, that you're not playing the diminished seventh, which kind of implies harmonic minor, because it tends to be a little bit more clashing. So awesome question once again. So yeah, really just find your root note. What notes do you have? What would their relationship be if you wanted to be a triad? That's probably going to be better to consider that a 5, so you got your 1, 3, 5 in place, and then find your 3. Now, of course, if you're trying to make there are different triads. You could also make just a simple flat 5 chord, which is basically a major chord, but with the fifth flattened. So if I was here at C, and I have my F sharp, or G flat in this case, since G is the 5, really we should call this G flat. It's basically the major third of C would be E. And then if you want to revert back to the natural 5, this would give you kind of a Lydian sound. It's really almost like F sharp and G. Alright, so diminished is not the only sound that you can make if you have a flat 5 and you're trying to make a triad. But if you are trying to make a diminished, then think of that as root, flat 3, and flat 5. So it's like a minor chord basically, but with a flat 5 as well. Alright, so I hope that helps. Thanks for your question. And the final question I've got for today, James is asking about combining scales. He says, I want to be able to start out in major, let's say G, then go to E minor, play the Egyptian scale and Hungarian scale, learn how to use the full diminished and augmented intervals to make my options wider. So basically, the thing with making scales work together is you want to look for the areas where they would overlap. You want a piece of the interval pattern that is the same from one scale to the next. Okay, the Egyptian scale, which is also the same thing as the Hungarian minor scale. It's basically a minor scale. All right, I'm going to go back to E minor for this just so that it's very guitar friendly here, but basically you've got your, let's start with the E here. All right, normally the minor scale is 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, 1, okay? In Hungarian minor, we're going to sharpen the 4 and the 7. So it's kind of like harmonic minor where we sharpen the 7, but we're raising the 4 as well. 1, 2, 3, raise 4, 5, flat 6, 7. Okay, so inside of that interval pattern, there's quite a bit that lines up with other scales. It's just about every scale is one or two notes off from several other scales. So whenever there's a scale that's only like one note off, you can start playing that portion of that scale as if you're in the other scale, and so you can be a little bit ambiguous. But basically, let's start with his example, G major, okay? If I just go with your simple 3-note per string G major, here's G. This is your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, so from G major, G is 1. If I play the same scale again, though, from the context of E minor, G is actually 3. E is 1, F sharp is 2, and then this is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's just different numbers, really. It's because it's a different perspective. It's counting from E as 1 instead of G. So a scale can take on up to 7 different sets of numbers because it depends on which note you're actually counting from as 1. Okay, so that's going to be important. So we could, if we're thinking of this as G major, for the portion of time while we're playing off of the G, we might want to think of it as G is 1. If you don't want to juggle a whole bunch of different numbers in your head, like personally I don't, I just think in minor all the time. For me, I know that I'm mostly going to be playing in minor scales personally, so I just juggle the notes of E minor all the time, and I don't really think about, so when I'm in major, I'm actually thinking 3, and that's, in my mind, that's the chord I'm even playing over or implying. When I'm playing majors, I'm just thinking of the 3rd mode of minor, because that's what major is. Similarly, a lot of people think of minor as just the 6th mode of major. They're both correct. It doesn't really matter. I just personally find this more advantageous to me because I'm just playing in minor keys almost all the time. So there's just no point in having a alien perspective from where I'm coming from. Okay, so I would recommend then, if you are going to be playing in one or the other most of the time, then think of it in just terms of, like, say, if you're going into minor anyway, just think of G as the 3, really. You're just playing off of the 3 mode, and you're welcome to stay in any other mode other than 1 for as long as you want, really. You can just play off of, that's what modes are all about, really. You know, if you want to play Dorian, you're playing off of the 4 mode of minor. You can just stay there, you know, and just play off, you know, give them an A in E minor. They don't ever have to hear E as the root. They don't ever need that resolution. You're the player. They get what you give them. That's the listener's role. But basically, yeah, think of this is your 3. So it can be very flawless because all you really need to do is just go straight from your G major into E minor, and now when you're in E minor, you replace everything that would have been natural minor with Hungarian minor tones. So that's the most simple way to approach it. Is just, okay, now it's minor, but we're going to do this kind of minor, and then just plow ahead with that one. So it is very similar to paying attention to what chord you'd be playing over. It's just, okay, are all these notes going to be safe to use, or are they going to clash in a way I don't want them to, like playing the wrong 7th at the wrong time, or playing the wrong 3rd. It's just like probably the worst sounding thing you can do generally. If you're playing over like a minor chord and you play the major 3rd of that root note, that's the kind of stuff that's going to stick out like a sore thumb and not really be very pleasing to hear. But generally, as long as you have the chord tones that are present, or that make the sound, you can pretty much imply whatever kind of all the rest of the chord tones as you like. So that's what's really nice about how flexible music is. It's just interchangeable scales, basically. You just need to know what's different, which scale degrees are different, because when you think of them as like a 7-note recipe for a certain emotion or set of emotions, then it makes it a lot easier to do it in whatever key you want. All right, so now, you mentioned full diminished and augmented intervals. I'm not sure if you mean the diminished scale and the augmented scale, but I'm going to show you a couple ways just to demonstrate how you would take this further, because those are, diminished scale is octatonic, so there's actually 8 notes per octave rather than 7. All right, so obviously the 8th note would be the octave in diatonic scales. but basically, like, what you want to do is look for the parts of your scale that overlap. Okay, so the diminished scale is just, it's also known as the half whole scale or the whole half scale. Kind of depends on which note you're starting on. But what we want to do here is basically, let's take a look at where the half steps are, because basically in your minor scale there are automatically 2 half steps. Same thing with the major scale. They're the same 2 half steps. They're just a different perspective. So like in E minor, the 2 and the 3. All right, you have your E, then a whole step up from that you have your F sharp, and then a half step. So there's your first one. The 2 and the 3 of the minor scale are a half step. And then on either side of that, there's a whole step. So you already, just the minor scale itself kind of hints at the diminished scale in the first 4 notes. You have whole step, half step, whole step. So right there you can kind of start playing. You just, when you get back to your E, you know, let's say you're playing in minor. Now go into diminished. So you can just kind of, you know, once you get your bearings on the fretboard and realize where your F sharp and your G are, you can kind of teeter between E minor and E diminished. Okay, the whole half E diminished. Similarly, all right, let's keep going up the scale. We have the E, F sharp, G, then you have a whole step to A, then you have B and C, and then D right there. So right there, once again, you have the same interval pattern centering around the 5 and 6 of your scale. 5, 6, 7, and then from there I'm just going to go diminished. I'm not even going to think about the numbers. I just need to keep the consistent whole step and half step alternating pattern. Okay, so that was basically the B half whole diminished scale. Okay, now I could, you know, and in a sense, I'm also kind of borrowing some notes there from harmonic minor as well. So I have my 5, my flat 6, my flat 7, and my regular 7. I'm actually skipping over the E minor root in this case, but that's one way that you could approach the diminished scale. And that's usually where I do it, because I actually really like the sound of starting this from the 5th. It kind of hints a little bit at Phrygian mixed with Phrygian dominant, especially if you stay within this 4-note pattern, or even 5 notes like the 4 below it, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, and natural 7. Okay, so once again, if I play this within the context, even just of the E, I don't even really have to leave the key of E minor entirely. So it's like I kind of flatten the root into the major 7 instead, and it still can work. And then you can just revert right back to minor. So you can just kind of reach in and grab a little bit of that diminished sound without really having to commit to full diminished. Now, if there's a chord playing in the background, though, you want to make sure that your actual, like, if you're going to commit to some serious diminished playing at that point, and I don't mean diminished arpeggios, but actually the diminished scale, you might actually want to include that note, and make sure that's actually part of your scale. So maybe even commit to like an E diminished scale instead. So that would be like, so. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind, so that the thing that's actually happening all the time in the background, if you're playing over just an E, make sure it's not like a minor, like an E minor chord, because that's going to also clash a little bit with it. You might want to keep it to just power chords, or even better, just single notes, just. some kind of a chugging type of single note type thing, because the more that's going on in the background, the more notes you're going to have to kind of dodge and make sure that they line up to what you're doing. But that's really the key to lining up scales, is just make sure that it shares at least a couple notes, or not shares notes, but shares a piece of the interval pattern itself. All right, so I've got a few different examples here. Another scale that you can use here would be the Hirojoshi scale. This is one that it's got an exotic sound, but it's not really that dissonant. Basically, I'm going to start this from B, but basically Hirojoshi is the same thing that happens if you are starting from the 5 of the scale. It actually lines perfectly to the Phrygian scale, but basically it lines up to the minor scale. And from Hirojoshi, this would be 1, flat 2, it goes straight to a 4, there is no 3, and then you have a 5 and a flat 6. Okay, 1, flat 2, 4, 5, 6. Now, this also happens to line up to the E minor scale. I'm doing B Hirojoshi. B is the 5 of E minor. So this is also the 5, 6, 1, 2, 3 of E minor, which is the way I usually think of it, is that just 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, because that's pretty much all I need. And then if I want to go back and forth, between, Hirojoshi. And every time I come back down to that B, it's really as the 5th of the chord. And if I wanted to revert back to minor, I just add the 7 back in there, 5, 6, 7, or harmonic minor, 5, 6, major 7, 1, 2, flat 3, 4, or if I wanted to do Hungarian minor. And all the while, this is 5 to me, because again, I'm thinking in terms of E. So that way it's all in the context of the chord. Now, of course, if I'm not playing over an E, maybe if I'm playing over a B, I can probably do the same thing. B will definitely be a safe note to land on in my melody over a B as well. But if, let's say that note was C, I want to target a different set of notes. I want to target the C, the E, and the G. So as long as the scale, though, lines up in interval patterns to at least most of the notes in the other scale, or at least some section of it lines up, that's going to be your safest place to start doing it. And you can almost just suddenly blend, just kind of steer off into this other sound and create some really interesting sounds, because the listener, by the time you've been playing like a minor scale or something common, they kind of start to expect that set of notes to come. And so when you start throwing another much more unexpected set of colors at them, they won't even know where it started, because you're using some of the same exact notes from that other pattern. So the trick is look for the notes that have the same interval pattern in both scales, and that's the point where you start to just go off into the other scale. All right, so I hope that addresses it. You're probably going to need to change a note here and there too, but basically, yeah, you want to find as much in common between the weird scale you're going to and the normal-ish type scale that you're coming from, so that you can do it as seamlessly as possible. All right, so that's it for this time. Again, if you have any questions, head over to shredmentor.com/Q&A and post them in the comments for the Facebook embedded post that's there, or you can just head over to the Shred Mentor Rock Guitar Academy Facebook page and just ask it directly on that thread, but it's always going to be easier to just go right to shredmentor.com. If you haven't already, go ahead and set up a free account so that you can play along to the free practice tools, or if you are really looking to make some big differences in your playing, try a free 1-week trial of the Guitar Practice Tools suite and kind of get a taste for all the different things that it can offer you. It may or may not be for you, but it's definitely how I practice now. It's changed everything about how I progress, so I do it much more quickly, and it also makes it so that everything I do is played in a musical context. So there's nothing that I ever play now that I can't actually use directly in a solo. So that's really what all of this is about. This is what Shred Mentor is entirely about. It's helping you make more music. So take advantage of it. I give away a lot of good stuff for free. So until next time, rock on.